Hello again. We're glad to be with you again. Glad you could find the time to uh, join in with this study. We're going to look at the second lesson today in this chart. And just to let you know, if you haven't saw the first lesson, it's about 10 minutes long, which is what we'll try to make this one close to. And might want to look at it first and then come along here with the second lesson. And today we're going to get into an overview of the scriptures, specifically the Old Testament. And so we're looking at this page is called an introduction to the Old Testament. And we're going to see there's going to be 4 periods of time that we're going to look at as the Old Testament covers it. I'd like to read from, however, the New Testament, just a little one verse from the book of Galatians chapter 4. It says, "When the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law." And what I'd like to point out here was that God did not immediately bring everything to pass. He allowed a period of time for the development of the plan that he had in store for mankind. And so what we're going to look at today is the development of that plan through these particular 4 periods of time. And as I read, it says, when the fullness of the time has come, God sent forth his Son. Just peeking ahead at the end of these 4 time periods, we see Jesus Christ coming, and of course that's the Son. And so this is the beginning, and it goes through these time periods, and it finishes, the Old Testament actually finishes with Jesus. Now that will take a little explanation to share with you, but we'll get to that later. But for today, I want to look at these time periods real quickly. In the beginning, we have a period called innocence. During that time period, there were only 2 people to ever exist in a state of innocence as far as humanity is concerned. Of course, those 2 people were the first 2 created by God. They are Adam and Eve. The reason that they are the only ones to ever live in that pure state of innocence is because they are the ones that initially brought sin upon the human race. And of course, they started at innocence, but they transitioned into another time period. And that will be the second one that we're going to call conscience. Before we get there, however, I'd like us just to back up a minute and talk about innocence just a little bit. In the time that they were innocent, they lived in this place that you've probably heard of, the Garden of Eden. And in that garden, they were the only humans to inhabit that. And there was a particular thing about them in that garden that went along actually with their innocence, and that is they were naked. They had no clothes. And in that state, there was no shame. And the reason for no shame is because they had, or they were in a state of innocence. And we could look at that, and it can be illustrated in the natural world as we look at a young child, say anywhere from the, whatever the upward age is, 1 maybe, from the age of birth to 1 year old. They are dwelling in that time of innocence. I have to say this, that's not to say that the sin nature is not a part of their makeup, but they have not reached the maturity level of knowing right from wrong, and so they dwell in that period of innocence. And guess what? It's not a shame for them to be like Adam and Eve were in a state of nakedness. They are not ashamed of that. And so as we look at the human race, we see the children, the babies of the human race, Adam and Eve, in their innocent state, they are naked and they are not ashamed. Okay, and so after a period of time, and we do not know how long it was, there came a temptation upon them and they entered into sin. And when they did that, the Lord had told them, when the day that you eat of this forbidden fruit, and we'll cover this more later, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And when the day came that they ate of it, the Bible tells us that they became ashamed. That shame marked the end of their innocence. And so they were now, first thing that they did, they sought to clothe themselves. And so we'll dig into that later on as well. As they enter into the time period of the conscience, they are knowing right from wrong. And again, the initial reaction to that knowledge was to clothe themselves. And so now they're clothed. They tried to clothe themselves with one thing in this time period of conscience. But God said that's not going to work. And even they themselves knew it. And again, we'll get into that later. But then the Lord did something, and the Bible declares to us that He clothed them. And so that clothing represents a covering for their shame. And there's so much to say here, but I'm going to keep it at 10 minutes. We're going to have to move along. But we'll get back to that covering. We'll get back to what does clothe us and what does take our shame away. We go all the way to the book of Revelation. We find that the Bible talks about a clothing that the people there are going to wear. And that clothing, all right, I'll just say this much. It's the righteousness of the saints. So how do we obtain righteousness and get back to that state of purity? Has to do with clothing, not physical clothing, but a spiritual clothing. We'll learn what that is. Okay, now the next time period they grew into out of that time of conscience is that they began to have teachers. And these teachers came from their own family. Much as it is today, the responsibility of parents is to teach children. And so we come to this time period that's written here on this chart, and it's called the patriarchs. Well, patriarchs is just another name for fathers. And so there's a time now that man has kind of grown up from innocence, like a baby that's without any shame, naked, to a time where they're toddlers and they begin to learn right from wrong, and that conscience begins to develop. But it takes more than just the consciousness of a man and a woman to get them where they need to be. They need teachers. And so God provides teachers in the form of fathers, the patriarchs. That period of time begins with a man by the name of Abraham, when God called him out to be separated for the sake of teaching his family, his extended family, which would eventually become a great nation. And that man Abraham then was the generator of the fathers, and we've referred to them even in the New Testament. Jesus mentioned Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and these are often referred to as the fathers. So that goes for a period of time, but even as society develops in our natural world, we know that it takes more than just the parents. There has to be civil order. There has to be laws and rules that we live by as a society. And so that brings us to the next and last dispensation or time period of the Old Testament. And that takes us to a man by the name of Moses. And as we study the Bible, we'll find out that Moses is the man that brought us the law. Well, actually, God brought the law, but he did it through the man whose name was Moses. And Moses brought about the Ten Commandments, the ceremonial laws, the rites of sacrifice, and all the particulars of what society as a nation, which would eventually become called Israel, would be governed by. And so just as we have laws to live by as adults, once we get past innocence and conscience and we leave the confines of our family and the influence of our fathers, the direct influence, I should say. I don't think we ever lose the influence of our Father in totality, but the direct influence of Him being the head of the house, we move into a place where we are responsible for ourselves, but there we need societal rules. And so that's just an analogy how that God brought mankind through these steps. We can understand them better as we look at how we ourselves also came through those same steps. In closing, I'm going to just do a little illustration here. The first period of time that we read about, the innocence, lasts, I'm going to hold my Bible up, it lasts this long. It's one page written on one side and the other. By the time we get to this page right here, we find that they have already entered into the time period of the conscience. The conscience then lasts for another little bit, and these are the pages that man is governed strictly by the conscience. And there's 3 or 4 or 5 of those until we come to the 12th chapter of Genesis. At chapter 12, we come to the man Abraham. And not going to illustrate that any longer, other than to say that these quickly, we move through quickly in the Bible story and come to this. And then we get to the law. It gets a little more detailed, takes a little longer to explain and understand. And that is for this reason. The book of Galatians tells us that the law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. And so this whole law was to bring us to the man that we call the Messiah, the man that was going to deliver in reality the human race from the sin that started way back here in a garden. How that happens and how that Old Testament teaches us those things will be the subject of all the lessons that we go through from the Old Testament. And we're excited to get into that and look at that because there's a lot of wonderful and interesting things to be seen there. And again, I want to thank you for joining us. This is the second lesson of a series called Exploring God's Word. Glad you took the time to I want to say enjoy it. And I hope you do. God bless you.